Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is This Week in DEI, which is our weekly segment. And this week, we're going to talk about what the DEI office actually is. So I know that there's a lot of confusion. I know that there's a lot of misconceptions. We are a newer office. So I've got several people with me today to talk about various aspects of it tonight. If you have questions, please drop them in the live. They will make it to us, and then we will take them at the end of our various talks. So I'm going to go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Gigi, and then we're just going to go through in the order that we're going to be speaking. So Gigi, go ahead and introduce yourself really quickly. Just tell people who you are and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Giada Alberti, and I am in Ontario at the moment. I am a member of the board of directors for the Society for Creative Anachronism. I also was the interim DEI officer when the office was first created for about, 10 months, I think. So it's nice to be here. Hi, everybody.
Thank you. It's back to me. My name is Zahra. My actual name is Jessica Van Hattem. I am the current SCA DEI officer, and I am from the Middle Kingdom.
I'm Sabine. I am from Artemisia, and I am Artemisia's Kingdom DEI officer.
Hi, I'm Sha'ya. I'm from Ontario, and I am Ontario's DEI officer.
I'm Aenor, and I am Ontario's EDI Council Chair.
Hi, I'm Margavati. I am from Meridies, and I am the DEI officer for the Barony of South Downs. So not the whole kingdom, just the.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we've got a pretty wide expanse of people at a variety of levels. So I think it's going to be a really robust conversation. I think we're going to be able to tell you a lot about what this office looks like in different places at different levels, and how it's changed since we've started it and what we envisioned and the monkey wrench that the pandemic has thrown into things. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let Gigi get started with just her background and her experiences with this office.
Thanks, Jessica. So basically, right now I serve as the ombudsman for the DEI office to the board. So I'm Jessica's ombudsman, and I'm happy that I was able to take that role over and continue the work I've been doing with the people who work in these offices, because I find the work to be very inspiring. I'm very happy that we have, 16, correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, how many kingdoms have DEI officers now?
I think we are at 15 or 16. It's pretty up there.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a huge development from when I started in January of last year as the interim DEI officer for the SCA, and there were no DEI officers for kingdoms. Ontario had a council, and so it's great to have a couple people here from Ontario right now, just to hear how they've grown and the lessons they've learned. I want to say that when the office was created, and I asked during my interview, I asked what was the vision for it. The board members at the time that wrote the job description and hired me, they really spoke to, they wanted to see longevity. They wanted to see a foundation be built so the SCA could help people understand what equity and inclusion truly meant for our society and work towards real equity and inclusion in our society. The basic job description I had was to look at our policies, our procedures, to evaluate them for their compliance with the concepts of DEI that are at work in all of our workplaces. I mean, most of us have taken some type of diversity training, right? I looked at our policies that we had at the moment on harassment and bullying. I helped to refine some of those. I think the last thing I did before stepping out of the office was work on the sexual misconduct policy. I think one thing Jessica has done since she stepped up was to look at corpora and look at the introduction specifically. But there's been other work that has happened since I stepped into the office. One was going through all of corpora and removing things like gendered language, removing things that were concepts that came from a place and time when we weren't truly thinking about equity and inclusion for all. So I'm really happy with, I think, the way the office has developed under Jessica's, under her guidance since October of last year. So she's been in, I guess, just a year, which it doesn't seem like it's only been a year. And I think that's pretty much it.
All right, thank you so much. It does not seem like it's been a year. It seems like it's been a little bit of time. Like I mentioned, my name is Zahra. I'm the current SCA DEI officer. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about myself and my background. So I do have an educational background in public policy, rhetoric, and writing for nonprofits. I've worked in educational curriculum design and corporate documentation, and I've participated in a lot of different diversity initiatives at a lot of different levels, both as part of a larger group or council, and also as a single individual spearheading something new. And really that's what this is in the SCA. We've never had this position before. We've kind of danced around some concepts related to it in different ways, but we've never specifically had an office that was looking to make sure that we stayed up to date with current equity and inclusive concepts in the modern world, that was evaluating our policies, that was looking at new procedures that needed to be developed and figuring out which policies we were lacking, right? Where are the gaps? So it's definitely still being built. We're still trying to figure out how this office interacts with the larger sphere of the SCA. And what that means generally is that all of you have a really big voice in how this office is shaped. If you give feedback to any DEI officer, myself or anyone else, about what you want to see, what you are lacking, what you have experienced in the SCA and what you feel could be done better or differently, you can probably impact the way in which this office is constructed, because it's here to make sure that we are more equitable and inclusive for everyone. So I talked a little bit about what the office was constructed to do. When I applied for it, the job description was basically exactly that, right? And the idea was really to be about education. So going through the policies, suggesting new policies, creating training is a really big one. And then understanding these concepts and teaching them so that people felt comfortable entering into these conversations about the concepts in this sphere. Now, originally, this was definitely going to involve quite a bit of travel, because I can't speak to kingdom climate across the SCA. Who could, right? Because even if you've moved around, you haven't experienced everything everywhere. So the idea was to have someone who is going to travel, who is going to meet people and learn more, and then work off of that. And then we had a pandemic, and that really changed things a lot, right? It changed the scope of everything. Suddenly, you can interact with people from all different kingdoms, right? Events are virtual, so anyone can go to anything. But then at the same time, that travel's off the table. A lot of that in-person, the connections, they just weren't going to be able to be made. A lot of people don't necessarily enjoy participating virtually as much as they do in real life. And so that also introduced a new element. So instead of giving these classes in person across the known world, it became creating a virtual experience and creating a virtual way to introduce this education. Something really important that I want to talk about is that the DEI office works with other officers, but it is in no way an investigatory office. We are not seneschals. Now, in some ways, because we're still setting things up, people are deputies to their seneschal, but that does not mean that they themselves are empowered with the seneschalate. So they will not be taking reports. They can help you get your reports to where they need to go, but they don't take them, they don't act on them. They're not punishing anyone. They're not out hunting down people. I mean, none of that is happening with the DEI office. So I want to make that very, very clear. I think that's a fear that a lot of people had. And it's just not true. We're not investigatory and we're not a part of the Seneschalate. But what we are resources, right? We are here to support everyone. We are here to be advisors. So if you come across concepts that you have some kind of discomfort with, if you are talking about anything related to DEI, anything, and you're like, oh, that doesn't sit well with me, I'm really afraid of what this will look like in the SCA, talk to us. We will teach you and we will create training and we will talk about what needs to be talked about so that people are comfortable. Because when it comes right down to it, it is about creating an equitable and inclusive environment. And then diversity is the natural outcome of that. So if we are truly equitable and inclusive, we will attract a variety of people because multiple kinds of people will be able to look at the SCA and see a space for themselves. So I think that that's a really important note. Just to wrap up, because I know I've been chatting, I am doing my best to connect with people over the course of this pandemic. Things are going to shift again once we get back to what is closer to normal for the SCA. And it's going to be a slow slide into what that looks like. We're not going to wake up one day and suddenly have everything be normal. There are some parts of the known world that are starting to have events because they are in countries where that is manageable. And there's some parts that it may take quite a bit of time for these bigger kingdoms to really be able to safely hold events. But what this office looks like is going to shift, and what we do is going to shift. So please, you have a voice. Please connect with us. Let us know what you want to see. Let us know what confuses you. Let us know even what you like. What do you want to see more of? Please do reach out and communicate. And we're here to be, a resource for everyone. So I'm going to wrap. If you have any questions, again, please drop them in the Facebook Live. I'm so sorry that the captions don't seem to be working. I am not entirely sure why Zoom is not interacting with Facebook in the right way. I am going to look into third-party programs for captioning. The captions will be available as soon as this video ends because that's basically what happened the first time. And I will get in touch with Facebook again and try to figure out what that is. Sorry about that. But we're working on it. Pardon our technical difficulty. So I'm gonna finish up and let the next person go ahead and speak.
All right, I think that would be me. Hi, I'm Sabine. Mundanely, my name is Talisha. And to give you a little bit of background on myself, mundanely, I'm a therapist. And the DEI office is very important to me because of that, sort of mesh. For me, it's very important that we create a safe society, a society where people feel like they belong. And like Zahra said earlier, that, they can see themselves. And how I sort of got into the office is about a year ago. So yeah, about a year ago at this point. Like I had some ideas, like in regards to sort of victim advocacy and things like that, where people who have experienced some bullying and harassment or sexual misconduct in the society, what happens? And so I had these ideas, and at the time, I was under the impression that one of our baronesses, Her Excellency Dame Varia, I thought she was the Kingdom DEI officer, and I reached out to her and I was like, hey, I've got some ideas, and she's like, cool, I'm not the person. And so that in that way, I found out we didn't have this office yet, and this officer yet. And so I threw my hat in the ring and I was like, hey, I got some ideas. I'd really like to take this on. And I feel very grateful that the Kingdom has trusted me with that. And so I stepped up into this office just a year ago. It's a year ago this month. And October is kind of a fun month for me in the SCA because it's when I started. Like I started in October of 2008, and now I've been in this office for a year, and so it's been quite the ride. My kind of early experience, because it at that time and still is a new office, is all right, I've got to create a kingdom handbook, for this office position. And so I relied a lot on what Giada had created for this office, and kind of looked at the corporate handbook and sort of went off of that in creating the kingdom handbook. And then the next thing that was really important to me was hosting a roundtable. So at an event last December, we did our first Kingdom Roundtable regarding DEI issues, because I wanted to hear from the populace what is important for this kingdom. Because like Zahra said earlier, like it's, in terms of her job, it's important to know what's going on society-wide. For me, I wanted to know what was going on for my kingdom. What were the things that we really needed to address? So we had the roundtable, and then I was going to give my first sort of DEI 101 training, and then the pandemic hit right before that happened, and everything went online. And it has been, I gotta say, this pandemic has been an interesting shift, because what I anticipated possibly taking years to occur, I think has happened in the last 6 months. It's been quite a reverb effect, and in positive and difficult ways. I think we've all experienced that, not just within the SCA, but also personally. And so for me, it has been really great to figure out how to create these trainings for the populace, deliver these trainings. And I've delivered them in various kingdoms at this point. It hasn't just been in my kingdom. And that has been a really cool experience to sort of have more accessibility. So that for me, it shifted things a little bit, because at first I went into it being like, this is my to-do list. And then the pandemic hit and it was like, no, it's not. I have a new to-do list, and it's been great. And I still want to get to what was on my initial to-do list. And, we've just had to be flexible. So for me, being able to provide that education that helps people feel safe and included and like they belong in the society. I mean, that's the biggest reason that I fell in love with this game, is the people and how you feel like you're home. And I want that to happen for everyone. So it's been a great ride. I'm excited to continue it, and I'm grateful to be on this panel as well, and that I'm able to talk about it. So I think I will shift, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
All right, hi, I'm Sha'ya. Again, I'm on TIER. So I think on TIER has kind of the longest history in EDI, DEI work as far as within the society. We started back, it was either late 2017 or early 2018 with the creation of EDI Council. And this kind of came out of like two different directions. We had actually formed a committee on bullying and harassment as well at the same time. And I had, or at about the same time, and I had started on the bullying and harassment committee. And the purpose of that was to write a policy and a procedure for specifically for bullying and harassment. And then what was kind of then born next was this EDI Council. And so I was a member of the EDI Council at that time. So that's been a couple of years ago now. We transitioned from that. We got a full-blown council going. Aenor's gonna talk in a couple minutes, but just actually like the third incarnation of the chair. So we started off with Lady Maud, and then after that we had Baroness Genevieve. And oh, I should go back. I guess at the very beginning we had co-chairs with Baron Yusuf and Lady Maud that were co-chairs. And at that time we realized that we needed an EDI officer. So that's when that was created. And then Yusuf went over and became the EDI officer for the kingdom. Here it is a deputy to the seneschalate position, and I'm sure we're all going to be transitioning out of that, and it's going to be in a different hierarchy eventually. But that's kind of how we outlined it initially. And so, kind of going through into that, before Aenor came on, I actually, that following September, my husband won crown for the second time. And so I removed myself from the council, except kind of as an observer and as a try to be an ally and find out what's going on, what we could do from the position of the thrones to advance EDI within the kingdom. So I talking about that a little bit. One of the kind of nice things is we were able to actually write our bullying harassment policy into law at that point. A law update was needed in general, and so another one of the things we did is we tried to go through and take out unnecessary gendered language and things like that. I can say that things happen a lot faster when you're on the throne because there's no, there's kind of no process of advising and going through and going through the explanations of all that. So I think we actually had some fairly good progress for that period of time. And then when I stepped down, we kind of transitioned out of this exploratory council that we had started with and had people who wanted to continue to reapply, and then new folks that were interested in getting involved apply as well. And so that's when Baroness Genevieve took over as chair at that point. And then I stepped down, and then I came in as a council member, and then following that, Yusuf stepped up as a baron, as a landed baron, and so he was transitioning out of the EDI officer position, and I transitioned into it. I would say kind of one of the things that I would describe in general about kind of what's different here and how we kind of go about things a little bit different is that our EDI or DEI officer I'm a general member of the council itself, but primarily my role is to be able to, bring any initiatives from the council and cycle it up through kingdom leadership. So if there's something that, if we're reviewing I don't know, ceremonies, for example, or if there is a rewrite of the handbook that needs to happen. Once that's completed within the council, then I'm usually the person that then filters that up and has the communications regarding it with both Crown and Seneschalate. So that's kind of where my role is a little bit different. The other kind of association that I have is if we need funding for something, I'm the one who kind of does the bookkeeping and and that kind of aspect of it. And then additionally, if the Crown asks for the Crown or Seneschalate ask for advice, I will usually take the question back to the council and then filter it back up. So I'm kind of a liaison in a lot of ways between the council and then kingdom leadership, and trying to facilitate getting things done, as well as being a general member of the council itself. So yeah, so that's kind of how we work, but I'm going to let Aenor talk about the council itself a little bit more. I don't want to take all the on-tier stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and let her talk a little bit more about what's actually going on in the kingdom.
Thanks, Sha'ya. I'm Aenor. I also live in On-Tier, and I'm currently the chair of the EDI Council. Our EDI Council, Sha'ya gave you some really great background, and I'm going to tell you a little more about sort of who we are and what we do. Our EDI Council consists of people from a variety of backgrounds. We're all people that are passionate in DEI and about finding ways to make a more equitable environment for our kingdom. Be these people DEI professionals or not. And the kinds of things that we work on, like Sha'ya said, we're going through the kingdom ceremonial to look for non-gendered language and to look for other ways that we can make a more equitable language within those documents. We're also looking at things like the Marshallet Handbook and other kinds of handbooks and policies that guide our kingdom to make sure that they're as equitable as possible. I've been on the council for a little over a year, and in just July, I took over as the new chair. And in this role, there's a couple of things that I'm working on for our council. One of them is that our council is still really, we're still sort of figuring things out as we go. And so one of the things I'm working on is trying to come up with more structure for how DEI works in our kingdom and how the chair role works specifically, and trying to come up with ways for us to have some better understanding and having better guardrails in place for us to be as effective as we can for our kingdom. Let me think. For me specifically, my background in DEI, I don't have a professional background in it. For me, it's a personal thing. I have two parents with some pretty severe accessibility issues, and I was raised in an environment where I was always needing to find ways to help them out and to be their advocate and to defend them. And you know, the way that I look at the world is very filtered through this lens. And it's something that I'm really happy that the society has given us an opportunity to be able to step forward and help each other create these more equitable and safe environments. Professionally, I do some DEI work where I'm creating learning modules for a team of about 80 people so that we can better bring DEI and equity into the work that we do and with the partners that we work with. And that's really gone a long way for helping bring this into our kingdom and helping come up with ways that we can think about learning to provide our kingdom. That's about it.
I guess it's me now. Hi, I am Margavati Bai. I am in the Meridies. I almost said mid-realm. That's where I started. It always is the first thing I think of. I'm in Meridies, and I'm in the Barony of South Downs. And I think I'm probably the newest at this of everybody because I sort of started this at the beginning of the pandemic. We were having some challenges as a barony, and I think in the kingdom in general, because of various things that were going on. And I think people were stressed because of, their change in life, as we all were. So I had been having conversations with our Baroness, who was struggling with figuring out how to handle all of it. It was very overwhelming to her. And we kind of threw around some ideas, about how I could potentially help. And the reason she approached me is that for the most of the time in the SCA, I don't have professional experience in any of this, but my primary focus in the SCA has always been extra-European research. So I'm used to having conversations with people that can be a little challenging. So talking about cultural appropriation, talking about how to be respectful. And also, I have a brother who's severely ADHD. So, there are things that I've lived with that, I just have a little bit of practice having conversations with people. And Her Excellency had said, well, you seem to be good at talking about these things. How can we put you in a position to be able to have conversations with people in ways that are de-escalating or can give them information without being intimidating? So at the time, I didn't even know if any barony had a DEI officer. I approached the Kingdom DEI officer, Baron Locke, and I said, do you have a deputy? And there was some scramble because he's also a deputy to the Seneschal. So I think I'm technically a deputy to the Seneschal for Meridies. But my goal, I sort of volunteered to be the DEI officer for our barony, because our barony it's not as reflective of the population of Atlanta as we would like it to be, but it's doing a decent job. We have a lot of young people, we have older people, we have people with, different needs, we have people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and a lot of people were having questions. And so I'm in place to help figure out how do we best solve some of those issues. And because they're really, for us at least, we're kind of learning how this all works, I'm working with the ombudsman, our regional ombudsman, our Kingdom DEI officer, and I've been in communication with at least a couple people in other kingdoms. I know at least Zahra and I have talked a lot about how to make this work. And my primary focus lately has just been educating people. So every month we had a dance night that our barony did, which we can't do now. So we've replaced it with a DEI class night. And so I offer classes on anything anybody wants to learn about or anything I can find people to teach about. We've done one on LGBTQ issues. We've done one on just a general Q&A. Zahra came and talked on one of them. So it's just been trying stuff out, seeing what works, seeing what sticks, and kind of being a test case for how we can best make this happen. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Everyone is clearly coming at this from a different perspective and different place. And I hope that helped show the breadth and the scope of what this office is covering in different areas of the known world. So we did get some questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read those off and we will try our best to answer them. Some things are going to be a little bit out of the kind of realm of the DEI office. And I'll point out when this crosses more into something that would be better answered by, say, a seneschal or someone else, something that we can't speak to with any sort of definitive authority. But for the most part, I think we're all happy to do our best to tackle them. So the first question we have is age and DEI. Will that be covered because intergenerational conflict is a thing? So the answer is that absolutely, it is part of equity and inclusion. We want to look at not only members who are older, but also at making sure that we are being inclusive of those of our members who have children and even very small children who want to continue to participate in the SCA with their children. So we're making sure that things are as inclusive as we can across the board. Now, this can look a few different ways, right? We want to make sure that we're perpetually evaluating sites for making sure that they're accessible, making sure that we're offering maps, making sure that we're offering as much information as we can in advance so that people can make choices for themselves about whether or not attending a certain event is something that they can handle at that time. So if people are able to say, hey, this was the only site we could get, there is not an elevator and there is a flight of stairs leading to the classrooms, then people have the knowledge in advance. Okay, so I need to contact them and say, I'm interested in this. Is there any way that this can be moved to the main floor or something along those lines? Another example of what we're talking about is when we create children's spaces, making sure that we're creating those in locations that are safe, but still close to what is going on for the rest of the event, because parents do need to stay with their children. And if they need to stay with their children way, way off, they may not enjoy the event themselves because they're so far away from everyone else. So when we look at creating children's spaces, making sure that we are not only creating a place that's enjoyable for the kids, but somewhere that will be enjoyable for the adults that are also there chaperoning them. I'm going to let Talisha speak more to it, but yes, absolutely. That is a part of the DEI mission.
Yeah, and Zahra covered a lot of things that I was thinking as well. Something that in the question that kind of stuck out to me was intergenerational conflict. And for me, I wasn't exactly sure what that meant, but kind of what came to mind is there a conflict between maybe an older generation understanding what maybe a newer generation is bringing to the table? And I can absolutely see that being an issue. And I think the way that we address this is by continuing to offer classes that speak to the DEI values and mission, as well as part of it's going to take time. We have to, sorry if you can hear my dog, we have to have sort of these conversations that can sometimes be uncomfortable and yet necessary for us to be able to progress and move forward, and so that everybody feels safe. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what the question was getting at, but that's kind of what came to mind for me and how it can be addressed.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That really is. All right, the next question that we have, can we truly address equity and inclusion so long as we only have an abled and male heavyweight to choose our rulers? Yes, I understand that often the partner of the winner of crown may represent diversity, but they can't rule unless an abled heavy weapons fighter wins a physical tournament. How do we address this as a society?
So I can take this in terms of like, I can see where the question is coming from. You know, there is sort of that that ableism that sort of stands out. I can see that. And at the same time, what I would say to that is that being a king or a queen of a kingdom is not the only leadership position that we have. And so while I can see that there may be some ableism issues possibly within that particular thing, I can also see that being within our culture, and teasing out some of this stuff from our culture is going to take some time, and it will require some of those difficult conversations like we discussed. What I would encourage you to think about is if you want to be in a leadership position, go for it. Like, there are many leadership positions within kingdoms and within the society in terms of officers, in terms of bod members, things like that. And I don't think those have as much of a maybe restrictive element as potentially being a king or a queen. What I am loving is seeing more female and non-binary fighters out on the field going for crown. I think that's fantastic. And I think overall we are seeing more of that. And it is a shift with the times. And lately we haven't seen any of it because of the pandemic, but that's kind of my thought with that question.
Yeah, this is a very zesty question, right? This is a huge conversation, and I'm not going to pretend like it's not. This is something that is one of probably the largest discussions in the SCA now. That said, I think that there's a lot of options moving forward. This is one of those things that's going to be outside of the scope of just this office to address, because this is something that affects everyone. So I think making sure that our heavy community is practicing concepts of equity and inclusion, so it is less male heavy, right? That is an aspect that people are actively addressing right now. I think also keeping in mind what Talisha had mentioned as far as there are different leadership positions, there are things about the society that are exclusionary in that they cannot be held by everyone out of just sheer numbers, right? There are so many landeds, there are so many kingdoms, there are so many sets of royalty. It's limited. So when we get to things that are in the way that they've been constructed, potentially exclusionary, like this, like peerage for many people, what we need to do is we need to ensure that what we are evaluating is as equitable and inclusive as we can make it, and that any potential alternate paths to something equivalent is also based in issues of equity and inclusion, so that people can still find that kind of fulfillment and validation, even if not in this original scope. Now, again, I can't tell you what's going to happen with this conversation because it is so broad and it is actively happening. And I think people are seeking further discussion and further ideas about what alternate paths to crown might look like. So I don't want to say more than I'm allowed to really say here. I can opine all day, but it would just be my personal opinion. So what I would say is that if you have questions or concerns about that, if that's something that you do want to pursue, have more conversations about, write to the bod. It is very important that you let them know what you're thinking and what you want to see and what is potentially an issue in the SCA today, because that is what they will look at and they will evaluate. So definitely write to the bod, let them know that this is something that you want them to do some discussion about. And yeah, it can definitely be something that comes up in the various forums that the SCA has. Sha'ya, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add and kind of address the the front end of that question was can we truly address equity and inclusion so long as this? And I think one of the things that's important in this conversation is, and I fully agree with everything that you just said. I do want to add, though, that there's, some very big day-to-day equity and inclusion issues that occur at every single event, right? That are really important that we do work at addressing, right? So, for example, making sure that there are non-gendered bathrooms or non-gendered showers available, things that are really making people, whether or not they feel safe at a particular event, on a regular basis. So while I do think some of these bigger structural, how our society chooses, its royalty, I think there's probably even a conversation to be had about how it chooses its, landed baronages. Things like that are important conversations to have, but I don't want what to get lost in is, can we truly address equity and inclusion without addressing these things? I think that there's a lot to address with equity and inclusion within the society, and there's things that we can address right now that as EDI officers and people working within the society in the EDI space are empowered to be able to do right now and right this minute. And those are the things that really, I think, take up the majority of the work as EDI officers for us.
Thank you. So I know it's not the ideal, it's not a perfect answer, but it is honest. And again, it's the beginning of a conversation that is much, much broader than we can speak to. All right, our next question. Is there a way to get the people who are adults but are mentally at a different age than their physical age into events at a reduced rate, as they will not get the same experience out of the event as other adults?
So that may be a little bit beyond the scope of this Week in DEI, because we're talking about, what is DEI and how it operates as far as like offices, classes, etc. But I will say that I know for a fact that many kingdoms at the kingdom level, or maybe even at the local group level, like a barony, have provisions to help people enter events if they can't afford to. I know in my own kingdom, some baronies have funds set aside that they have fundraised on their own that they will use to allow newcomers to come to events. So if in your kingdom that is an issue, I think you should talk to your local group and see if there are any provisions for you in that way. I'll also say that, let me just make sure I look at the question, because they will not get the same experience out of the event as other adults. There are many groups and kingdoms that are working on making sure that all different types of people have fun at events and get something out of it. So even to the point where I've been to some events where there are low sensory areas or activities, not just for children, but for people who want to get something different out of an event than the traditional classes or fighting or going to court, etc. So I think one of the major things I would suggest you do is talk to your local group, the host of the event. If that's a barony, talk to them. If it's a kingdom level event, talk to your kingdom seneschal, talk to the event steward, email them, ask them questions, say, hey, this is the person that I'm going to bring to this event. These are their needs. Are there provisions for it? These are the things they might want to get out of an event. Will that be there? A lot of kingdoms are also getting really good at making sure they have like icons on their flyers and on web pages, so you know what's available or not available at an event. But I think communication would really, really be the key here. Talk to your local groups, talk to your kingdom, see what's available. And if this is an idea that you would like to see considered at maybe the society level or the kingdom level, write to your kingdom and ask if they would support something like a discount. And that is a conversation that can be had. So your kingdom has its own, like Kingdom Seneschal has their own email address, which will be specific to your kingdom. If you want to write into society level, you can always write comments at SCA.org and put your ideas there, and it'll be discussed.
Awesome, thank you. All right. Are there guidelines available for baronies and shires for gendered language? We have had some conflicts around it lately.
So I'm going to talk about this for a second, but I have a feeling that both Zahra and Sha'ya will have more to say about this, because I'm still, like I said, I'm still kind of, we're working out exactly what this looks like for our barony. I generally, if I have a question about anything, I go to the corporate DEI webpage and I look at the guidelines there. That's my first place to go to, because that's everything that we have that's public, that, you know, that I can read. Beyond that, there are some great classes out there that people have put out on gendered and non-gendered language. We have a number of non-binary people in our barony, and so these conversations have come up. And one of the things that I did, I think it was last month or the month before, is that I noticed that on our wards recommendation form on our Kingdom website, we didn't have a place in there to put a non-gendered title. And we had, I guess the month before that, I had hosted a class on non-gendered language, because we have a person in our barony who knows something about that. And so I wrote to our web minister and I said, hey, is there anything, is there anything we can do about this? And he was like, oh, totally. And so he added them in. And so while in our barony, we don't necessarily have a hard and fast guideline, we have been carefully listening to the people in our barony who do prefer to use different pronouns, who prefer to use different titles. And we've been changing policies and just changing kind of the way we do things. And the biggest example of this is that we have these two awards. One is an award given by the men to the women, and one by the women to the men. And we actually have formed a committee to revisit that award and figure out how to move forward with it, because we acknowledge that it's not as inclusive as it once was, because we understand now that not everybody identifies as male or female, and it doesn't provide a place in the middle. And it's been really well received. We've tried really hard to involve people, new people to the barony, people who've been in the barony a really long time, just to make sure that everybody has a chance to talk about it. So no, we don't have any hard and fast guidelines yet. I follow what the society has put out, but really it's mostly just listening and talking and making sure we understand what people need.
Thank you. To speak a little bit more to that, and I want to really let the Kingdom level folks talk about their experiences. So I've seen this kind of addressed in different ways. And if there is a request for a more centralized sheet or even class to talk about this, what we can do is we can create that. We can look at the ways that this has been addressed across various kingdoms, and we can put together the suggestions that everyone has for what worked for them and for what didn't work for them. I know that the gendered language can exist within policy. It can exist within court ritual type things. So there's a lot of different options for addressing that. There's ways of going through your policies and making sure that if you're referring to people by specific gender, you can make that more general. Speaking to people as good gentles all instead of lords and ladies when you're in court. Casual references can be something as simple as folks, nobles. There's a lot of options that are not gendered, and there are 3 available non-gendered, or I should say gender neutral titles. So there's noble, noblesse, and armiger. So making sure that people know that that is an option at every level, because I think a lot of people don't know that, and they're like, I don't know how I feel about having to go with lord or lady. So making sure that people are aware of what their options are, and that we're doing our best to disseminate the work that's been done and then collect information on what needs to be done and work on that moving forward. So yes, please do reach out if people want a more centralized form, and that's something that the Kingdom DEI officers can work on collaboratively. But I'm going to let them speak more to it.
Yeah, so that was kind of one of the things I was going to suggest in general. I mean, you should always be able to direct any of these questions to your DEI officer. If there are specific issues that are coming up, it sounded like there was something contentious. I think with something like that, that's probably a good thing to just direct straight to your EDI officer. There's they might be able to assist with that. I think in addition to kind of what Zahra was mentioning was that, there's things that can be done. And one of the things that I think has been most effective, at least for us, is being able to do things from behind the scenes with a lot of this to change culture. And so one of the things that we did really early on, or that I had them implement really early on, as I mentioned, sometimes it's a lot easier to get things done when you're on the throne. But one of the things that we did as pretty shortly after my husband went crown the last time was we made sure that there was a pronouns drop down box for award recommendations. And so this actually makes it a lot easier for leadership too, depending on where, whether this baronies or shires or whatever, is to know how to address somebody when they're coming into court, right? And I think a lot of times you see some of that culture change from, the people that seem to have some of the bigger voices. If they're kind of starting it that way, it's kind of modeling the behavior that's expected of the populace. So that was one of the things that we had added in, so that we knew when we were calling somebody up, so we could have our herald, and they would know when they were calling somebody up, how to refer to the person coming forward. In addition to that, I would say, again, going through the ceremonials, there's no reason there should be any gendered language at all in any ceremonials or in any handbooks. It's completely unnecessary. There just is no reason for it. Don't get me wrong. I think that if somebody wants to be referred to as, I went by queen, right? I identify, my pronouns are she, her. Being a woman is a part of my identity. So I think, if somebody asks you to include that, then absolutely that's important. But as for something that's just going out to the general populace, it's trying to encompass everybody, there's no reason for there to be gendered language in it at all. And same thing for the ceremonials. There's no reason for there to be gendered language in the ceremonials at all. So I would say, the default is to use non-gendered language all the time, unless someone, is requesting, that one half of your baronial heads goes by Baroness, identifies as female, then that is obviously that's fine to call her, Baroness, not, the Bruno Cornet or whatever kind of, non-gendered language you might choose to use if you were going with non-gendered language. But I think the default should always be non-gendered language. And that's what we have kind of tried to do, and what we have tried to push down into the baronies and the shires, as well as suggestions in general. And then again, for like when people are coming up to receive award or coming into court or something like that, making sure that the forms allow for asking, what pronouns someone uses. So.
And just to add a little bit to that, our kingdom has done the same in terms of making sure that, there's a pronouns offered in award recommendations, as well as removing in the crown tournament entrance list, male or female, just you could say consort, you don't have to necessarily identify gender in that sort of way. I was even seeing online, as maybe even a kingdom fundraiser idea of having sort of pewter pins that say Lord, Lady, or Noble, and different things like that can kind of help with just a better base of knowledge around gendered language.
We had one little thing that I forgot that I thought was really cool. We did a class on, after our little class on titles and non-gendered language, one of the people who took the class requested that we all be more visible about using our pronouns. And I got to tell you, being in this office has been an education for me too, because I have the enthusiasm, but not necessarily always the knowledge. So I'm so glad to learn new things all the time. And I learned that it's really important, you know, to be able to be public and obvious about your pronouns, even if you don't have pronouns, like even if you present as the gender you were assigned at birth. I'll just say it that way. And so what we did is we have this roster on our baronial website, and we updated our website to include a place to put preferred pronouns, and have asked everybody in the barony to send our preferred pronouns to the webmasters, so that to our web minister, sorry, so that he can include them on that forum, so that it doesn't become a strange thing to do it. It's just sort of normal that everybody includes their pronouns. So it's little stuff like that where we're just trying to normalize things that, you know, people need.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. All right. Are there resources for me to learn about the structure of our DEI strategy?
So I wanted to take a crack at this, but first let me just say thank you for that question. One thing that you learn when you start trying to understand the concepts of equity and inclusion is that making assumptions puts you at a disadvantage. So it's best to ask questions, have conversations, and not assume based on like your visual evidence or observations that you know things. So you're asking where the resources are for you to learn about this. Great. One thing I encountered was people assuming that they understood my background or who I was or what communities I belonged to, or maybe, you know, what my experience was in the world by looking at me. So I am a person who identifies as neurodivergent. I also have a disability, and I retired from work because of that disability. I'm also a woman, right? I'm a woman of color, and I'm a Black American, right? So there's a lot of different communities that I identify as a part of that would be considered underrepresented or marginalized. And so when people look at me, I don't want them to assume they know who I am. I want them to get to know me. And that's one way to actually help to counter your biases, is by exposing yourself to people who are different than you. So thank you for asking this question, so I can expose you to where to go to find out about the DEI strategy, instead of just assuming you know what it is or you have an idea based on some workplace training you took, because the SCA is a very special, unique place. That's why we love it. And so our equity and inclusion program is really special and unique based on that. So if you go to sca.org/ I want to tell you the right one. Hold on. /DEI-office. On that page, you will find links to everything, right? So there's a blurb on what the DEI office was created for. There's the DEI officer's email address and other contact information. And there's a link that says DEI documents. And if you click on DEI documents, it will take you to a page that has a link to the handbook. So you can read all about what the DEI office is about, the mission, the strategies, the job description, the position description for the actual DEI officer, and what was required of that person to actually be interviewed and chosen, terms and concepts, resources and links like infographic posters and classes. The class handouts and videos are all linked, in the DEI document. So that's, I think, the first place that you should start to learn about the overall society DEI strategy and the structure of it, is to go to the DEI page on sca.org and go to DEI documents and just peruse there.
Yes, I was totally going to recommend the website. I am going to be updating the website soon with some of the new material, because we are continuing to create things. So I have updated handouts that I'm going to be putting up there, as well as the SCA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion page on Facebook. So the classes, there are videos, and they're all archived on the page. They also have captions, which again, I'm gonna have to look into third parties to get it live, but once it's uploaded to Facebook, you can turn on captions. So all of those do have captions. They are all accessible. So that's another resource for everyone. Reach out to me if you have questions. I'm happy to be a resource to help explain anything that you're curious about. And I can give you kind of the latest, right? Because like I mentioned, this position is in a state of flux with this pandemic. And so while we have overarching goals that aren't going to change, some of the things that we do on the day-to-day, and some of the different parts of what this office looks like are going to shift as time goes on.
And what I would add to that is that if your kingdom does have a DEI officer, reach out to them as well and see if they can point you in the direction of any resources. And if they don't, if your kingdom doesn't have a DEI officer, one, I would say, hey, throw your hat in the ring. It's a great time. And two, you, as this officer, I have been able to create resources for my kingdom. So I was able to create a reporting organizational flow chart for when issues regarding bullying and harassment happen. And so it's just sort of this one-page thing of, oh, this is who you go to when there's an issue, and this is who you talk to. Because stepping into this office, I didn't know that was a thing. And so I would say, if you want more resources, they are there. And if they're not there, let's create them.
And Sabine's flowchart is great. I am going to also put that in my list of things to be uploaded to the page, because I think a lot of people have asked for that. And we are working with the Seneschalate to create a more general reporting flowchart as well. So there will be more transparency and more clarity around that process. But again, that's kind of one of those reaching across the different offices. All right, thank you to everyone. How is inclusion and equity different for different kingdoms? So I guess I can speak to that. Different kingdoms are going to have different modern demographics within that kingdom. Now, the biggest thing is, because we span the globe, there are a lot of different countries involved. And so you have a huge variety of different cultures, climates, languages, modern laws that we still have to abide by. There's a lot. There's a lot across just the idea that we are across so many places on basically every continent. Now, that said, across the different kingdoms tend to want to address different things. I know that in my kingdom, some of the things that I originally talked about were things like cultural appropriation, looking at issues of how race interacted. So looking at, where are we doing our demos, right? Is our SCA population to some degree reflective of what the modern population in an area looks like? And if not, what can we do about that? Because we encompass like Chicago, and we encompass Columbus. So we were looking at different ideas as far as that's concerned, but mostly we started there. Now, in other kingdoms, people identified different things. I had a conversation with Talisha about the idea of mental health, and she created an entire class that we've taught here on This Week in DEI called Impact versus Intent. And it's great. She talks at length about how our words can change what people understand, and what we meant can be not the same thing. And the repercussions of that in our day-to-day communication, how that affects arguments, how that affects resolving those arguments. It's a great class. But that was something that she identified as a priority for her kingdom. So different people in different places have looked at different initiatives in different ways. And it comes from not only their personal background, but also the problems that they see manifesting across the kingdom, which is just going to be different. Each kingdom does have a very unique climate. And each kingdom has kind of picked up pieces of this in different ways. Some kingdoms already had accessibility officers. Some kingdoms already were working on certain things. We mentioned how Ontier's original council predated the existence of this office at the SCA level. So there's a lot of different things to kind of come into play when we're looking at how it's different for different kingdoms. So next question. how can we represent the diversity of the SCA without tokenizing Scadians from underrepresented populations? And I'm actually going to let Margavati speak first because I just talked a lot. So go ahead.
And I am speaking as an outsider to this conversation and not necessarily as an expert, because as I am I am a cisgendered white woman in the South, with everything that means. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, because my experience is not the same as, say, Zahra's experience or the experience of a lot of people I know. I've had to learn this kind of the hard way. And really what I've kind of come to is what Giada said, I think earlier. I'm going to just parrot what she said, I think 2 questions ago, which is that you shouldn't assume. And it's different when you actually know people from different backgrounds. And for me, I am always checking myself. That is basically, like, I had to learn that discomfort was a very important teacher. And for me personally, when I start to feel uncomfortable about something that I'm doing, when it comes into like a space like this, I kind of stop and I go, okay, why am I uncomfortable about this? What is this trying to teach me? How do I learn from this? And part of that was I had a really uncomfortable experience at a demo where I approached someone and I asked him a number of questions that I expected answers that I did not get. And I realized what I had done is I had sort of pigeonholed him into a place where he really wasn't. And so I think that it's actually really helpful that the SCA is an educational organization, because it provides an avenue for us to say, okay, well, I want to learn more about this. I don't know exactly the right path to expand without tokenizing, because I think that there's kind of a difficult barrier to overcome where you have a few people and then you have enough people where somebody doesn't feel like a token person. And I can't really speak to that because I don't know how to approach that. All I know is that I can just continue to promote and educate on, my thing is definitely extra European cultures. I'm very big on, like, how do we provide more classes and things that people feel seen in? And that's all I can do as somebody who's, who is generally from a dominant culture. Like, that's all I can do. I'm a little, like, I don't want to speak to it too much because I don't really have the personal experience to be able to say that, but it's just be genuine. Don't make assumptions. Don't present a culture in a way that is very, like, try to be authentic in how you approach something, authentic and honest.
So I wanted to take a little bit of a crack at this one too. Because of my cognitive issues, I have to write down notes. So just to make sure I stay on track. So we're talking about representing the diversity of the SCA without tokenizing Scadians. First, I would say be anti-ist. So right now there's like be anti-racist. There's like books, articles. If you Google be anti-racist, there's all kinds of like tips on how to do that. I think I would say if you're being actively anti-ist, whatever, ableist, sexist, genderist, whatever, then that will help you from tokenizing Scadians and to be, and help you be more realistic about where we are. So educate yourself. If you have questions about a culture or a community, go online, Google that community's name. There are plenty of bloggers and Instagrammers and Facebookers and people who probably talk about their experience in that community. If you want to get to know challenges and pros and cons and things that they would like to see happen, don't depend on maybe a person in your barony that is in that community to educate you on all of it. That is a lot of emotional labor for anyone to do. Like I said, I'm a person who is a member of several different underrepresented communities, but I don't represent those communities for the SCA. I can't tell you what all Black women think or all neurodivergent women who are Black and disabled think. I can only tell you what I think. And I can also tell you, like, in my conversations in those communities, what I've heard. But so another thing is be modest. If you are a member of an underrepresented community, make sure that you are vocal about your limitations and the fact that people can't generalize based on what you say because you are only representing yourself. Be honest about things that could be better in the SCA, because just because, for instance, I'm a peer, just because we have a Black female peer doesn't mean everything is fine, right? So I think being honest is another part, and being realistic. There's always room for improvement. I think we should talk about the things we have improved on, but I also think that we should talk about things we would like to see happen. So be anti-ist, be realistic about what is going on and what maybe needs to be improved, be modest about who you are and who you represent, and be honest with each other. And I think if you do that, it will help not tokenize people and then not allow yourself to be tokenized in the SCA.
Yes, I really want to highlight and underscore the idea that no one member of a marginalized group can speak for all members of the marginalized group. So certainly you can seek perspective, that's fine, but it's impossible for me to tell you, you know, what all Black people in the SCA think about one particular issue, or, you know, it puts people into a position of having to be a representative when they can't be, and they might not feel comfortable being. So when we talk about representing diversity of the SCA, a large part of what we can do is represent the diversity of cultures that we pursue knowledge about. So I've had people kind of talk to me about things like having a series on different museum pieces and artifacts, talking about those, creating a series on garb from different places across different eras. There are definitely ways to show that we are a diverse space that's pursuing knowledge about a variety of things without holding up your one like Asian American member of your population or your one like British Jamaican person and being like, you don't want that. It's uncomfortable. I will tell you, it is uncomfortable. And it makes people feel as though you've flattened their identity into just that one aspect, right? That's what tokenizing does. It turns people into just a representation of that one specific thing when they are whole people and they're here trying to pursue an experience. Something I would also recommend, be very cautious about committing microaggressions. That's something we talk about in the 101 at length, but not saying things that you may have intended in positive ways, but are going to land in very negative ways. So not assuming that someone necessarily wants to explore their specific background, or worse, not assuming that their specific background only existed within our period as a slave, which is something that people have said, right? If you want to pursue your history, I guess you could be a slave. It's a terrible thing to say, and it's also highly inaccurate, right? So being careful not to commit those microaggressions, not to assume anything about people based on those preconceptions that you might not even be aware you have. This is something we talk about more, right? This is a big thing for me to just throw at you. We talk about what that term is, what it means, what it looks like. We talk about the idea of unconscious bias. There's a class called Definitions and Concepts. I teach it, several Kingdom DEI officers teach it, several other people teach it, honestly. It is kind of our 101, and it'll be taught, it has been taught on this weekly segment, and it'll be taught again on this weekly segment because it's got some really important information for engaging with this in a productive way. But yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that we can represent diversity in the SCA without getting into that more harmful tokenization of people. But all right, the next question. Doesn't site selection in the USA relate more towards ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, accommodation / compliance, and is that within the scope of our DEI office? So accessibility is something that the DEI office is working to create more knowledge and more education around. I have a class called Inclusivity for Event Planning. I worked on it in conjunction with Lady Elizabeth, who is a woman in my kingdom, who has a 2-hour course on accessibility for events. It's a great course. It talks in detail around specific accessibility things that can be done. My course is slightly more broad and speaks to some of the other equity and inclusion concepts that get pulled in, but I worked with her to try to bring in as much of that accessibility component as possible. It is important to remember that some things are ADA compliant, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're accessible. So we do need to be thoughtful about the ways in which accessibility interacts with the SCA as the unique entity that it is. And like I said, I won't go too much into it because there is a class. You can seek out Lady Elizabeth. I can drop her contact info. It's in the class handout too. But yes, absolutely. I think it's something that the DEI office is doing its best to tackle. There is also a new service animal policy that's going to be added to the Seneschal handbook. It's already approved. You can find it in our documentation. And we wrote that based on research into the ADA and what that looks like. It does apply across the board of the US, basically everything that's not low, how do I say it? Lockock. That's it. Lockock. I'm like, I always say it wrong, and I'm so sorry. I do my best. But it does apply across that because it's in our Seneschal handbook. And it is coming from a place of trying to create a little bit more knowledge about how to interact with the handlers of service animals and what the expectation should be for everyone involved. Because that is something that a lot of people don't necessarily have a lot of knowledge about. So yes, we absolutely do our best to incorporate aspects of that into the scope of our office. But we're still learning, we're still building. So if there are things that you would like to see related to that, please do reach out. You can talk to your Kingdom DEI or me, equity@sca.org. Okay. How do each of you work to hold yourself accountable for growing more on your anti-bias journeys?
So first of all, I just want to say how much I love this question and thank you for whoever asked it because it is such an important question. So I would say for me, it would be, first of all, it would be building awareness. And that can be, like Margavati said earlier, very uncomfortable because we all have sort of unconscious biases that we need to be aware of and that we need to challenge. So awareness is the first step, as well as being open to it. Because the thing that I notice, at least with myself, is that if I become aware of something and I'm not open to it, then I either personalize it or I become like the victim to it. And none of that really helps with growing an anti-bias journey. And so for me, it's not only being aware of it, but then it's also asking that question that Margavati asked earlier, which is, what can I learn from this? It's kind of adapting that humility and saying, this isn't about me, this is about something larger than me. What can I learn from this? And what can I do better? Because here's the thing, we're all doing the best we can, and we can all do better. It's that dialectic that we're all holding all the time. And so I love this question because it can be very nuanced, and hopefully that helps in summarize that position in a bit.
Those are absolutely all things that I also try to do. Some of the things that I also use, I have like I have a mindset that I follow that Dr. Ibram X. Kendi shared, that it's actions that you do every single day. It's every action every day that you have to be aware of and look at yourself. And you're not going to be perfect all the time. That's part of your journey, but you got to aim for being a better person, being better about your own unconscious biases. And there's a lot of really great resources out there to aid in your own understanding of where your implicit biases are. Harvard has this amazing thing called Project Implicit. And if you just Google Harvard Project Implicit, you'll find the site. And it's a bunch of tests for you to be able to find out where you unconsciously lean on a couple of different scales. And there's the state of Washington came out with these really amazing DEI competency scales that I really think are fantastically made, that help you understand sort of where you are on your own journey of trying to be a better person who's not having these unconscious biases impact other people. The other thing is impact is really important. It's your intent can be positive, but how it's received is what's more important. And the last thing is it's all about educating yourself. Never stop learning. Your learning journey is never going to end. And that's awesome. That's a great fact.
So I'm going to just piggyback on mostly everything that has been said because I agree with 100% with all of it, especially actually the Ibrahim Kendi is, I follow him on Instagram. He's just, I like reading his stuff because it makes me think. He just released a journal that is essentially just reflections on how to be anti-racist, just to make you think about things. And the reason that I'm always kind of facing this for myself is I know it's difficult for other people to do, especially if you come from a place where you've never really had your biases challenged. Which I did because I grew up in the South, and there were a lot of things that I just sort of took for granted as being true that weren't necessarily true. You kind of just, you learn, like, it's something you have to learn. It's a skill. It's like learning how to take criticism. It's like learning how to speak in public, which I'm not great at today, but I'm working on it. And like any skill, if you practice it enough, you get better at it, right? So, but you have to practice. And so I do everything in the SCA, I just devour information about it. I'm always learning. I watch shows that I've never seen before. I try to expose myself to creators who don't look like me or sound like me. When I started really getting down to researching India, which is my main focus, I really wanted to do dance, and I could have learned it online, but I got over my discomfort and I joined a school. And being around those women and just listening to them and, having, like, really listening, you have to really listen. You ask questions, you really listen, and then you think about it and you say, okay, well, what does that mean for me? How does that challenge what I believed? And I thought I didn't have any because I'm the daughter of an activist. Everybody has biases. One of the things she said, her boss, who kind of got her into activism, said, her boss said, everybody has a prejudice. I'm prejudiced against people with tiny beady eyes. And it's like a thing that's made me think, right? Like it doesn't have to be the smartest thing. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but everybody has these. And so when you encounter them and you're like, and it makes you do something weird, you stop and you just go, wait a minute, like, why do I think that? Where is that coming from? Why am I acting like this? And really inspect it. And I think that the more you practice it, the better you get at it. It just takes a lot of practice. And you have to be curious.
Yeah, and I'll probably just add to that too. I think one of the, listening is so important. I mean, it's one of those things that, they kind of make this joke that we have two ears and one mouth, and that's because we should be spending most of our time listening. And particularly in these kind of environments, and it's not just listening as like an auditory thing. It's the information that we're consuming, that we're either reading. There are some amazing webinars out there. There are some really amazing blogs and podcasts, and I mean the resources are endless. for being able to kind of do different work. And obviously there's a lot of different areas too, and there's something for every area as well, right? So I think that, you know, it's constant. I usually, when we're not pandemicing, I'm traveling a lot, and so I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I actually do a lot of Audible reading in addition to, you know, the stuff I'm doing like on my phone and articles and the groups. One of the things that I find that I just kind of wanted to tag in on with this is making sure that, at least for me, I'm always making sure that I'm financially supporting the creators of this stuff too. So a lot of times there's options for like Patreons. A lot of times there's options to, you know, to be able to join some of these webinars, to be able to give back and make sure that, you know, this isn't a free emotional labor thing, that people are actually receiving something for the work they're doing. And so I try and choose, because I'm in a financial situation where I can do that. I try and choose to go after, you know, to do those types of things. I think there's also a lot of, you mentioned you're daughter of an activist. So I'm pretty active in a variety of activist spaces, and I think that there's a lot to be learned there too. Now that doesn't mean that I'm not saying that EDI and activism is one and the same, but I think that as far as furthering, you know, some of and reinforcing some of my journeys, you know, I'm constantly learning in those spaces as well. So I think for me, those are kind of the variety of places that I go and to try and hear from a diverse subset, because there's so many different issues that we're addressing, right? And you're never done learning. I mean, that's the thing with this, right? It's constant. You're never done on this journey. This is a lifelong journey. There's never a destination that you're going to reach and you're going to be done. This is constant. It's daily, and it's for life.
Thank you. All right, so we are coming up on time. We're going to do 2 more questions. Anyone whose questions we didn't get to, I'm so sorry. You can definitely reach out to me at equity@sca.org or to your Kingdom DEI officer. There are regionals, there are baronials, as we know. There's a council if you're an Ontier, and in Drakenwald. So you have a lot of options. So 2 last questions. Like many groups, the SCA uses a lot of terms and phrases that are unfamiliar to outsiders. How can we either use language that is clearer for those unfamiliar with the terminology, or help people become familiar with them, especially for those who may have difficulty with language in general? So one of the things that I talk about in my event planning class is the idea that you come into the SCA as a new person, and there is just this incredible amount of information to absorb, right? There's custom and ritual and titles and terms, and there's all of these crazy things. And there's a lot of things that are so ingrained that people don't even know to tell you until you're confused and they're like, oh yeah, no, it's not that weird, it's this. I can speak to that pretty well. I've only been in the SCA 4 years. And at my second event, I witnessed a knighting, and I'm watching it and I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, this is super cool. And midway through, my friend leans over and she whispers, he's going to slap him. Don't be alarmed. And I was like, what? And I look up, and of course he gets slapped. And I thank God she told me, because I definitely would have been like, oh, people slap people here? I don't want to be here. Like, I'm done with this. But that's one of those rituals and customs that needs to be explained, and for some people needs to be warned for, right? If you don't want to see this, you should know in advance, hey, totally consensual, but this is going to happen and you need to be prepared. So one of the things that I talk about is creating a space at Newcomers Point with information, whether it's through pamphlets, whether it's through having someone there who can answer questions, whether it's through just little blurbs on things that give you information, and then building that in, right? Keeping a section at court for people who might want kind of whispered explanations about what's going on, or keeping a table open at feast for folks who may not know as many people and would like more info about the area that they're in. So there are different options for introducing people to that terminology in a way that is not this kind of waterfall of like, well, here's the SCA, I'm going to dump it over your head. Good luck with that. Because we're excited about what we do. But what we do is so huge and so much that it will take people months to really understand and feel comfortable with all the terms. And even now, I'm still learning, right? There's regional differences. First time I heard someone talk about an ERIC, I was like, you're going to fight on who? Like, I don't, because there's just so many differences across the SCA. So, yeah, I'm going to stop there and let Talisha go ahead.
I love what you had to say. I think for me, the thing that helped me the most when I started was that my kingdom had a piece of their website that kind of ran through like all the different titles and all of the awards and what it meant and those kinds of things. So that kind of helped me when I first started. And then, yeah, part of it is just like figuring out how to best communicate this information. And it might be a great issue to not only bring up to your DEI officer in your kingdom, but also maybe your shadow lane and see if there could be sort of a coordinated effort on that front.
Awesome, thank you. All right, last question. Do you have any input regarding inclusivity of gender segregated awards without combining them both into one award or erasing gender ritual altogether? We have a similar award in my barony, and as a transgender man who has fought for almost a decade to be seen as male, I would not wish to see it be made a single gender category in the quest for inclusivity. I am a good man, not just a good person, and I find the SCA to be a wonderful place to have a reference for healthy masculinity based in service. Are there any examples of expanding the framework of gender segregated awards being tackled while preserving being gendered for those who wish to be?
So I can only speak to my experience in my barony. And the short answer for this is it is specific to your barony and the members of your barony. In our barony, it was brought up about a year ago. And I think the committee was formed just before the pandemic started. And we asked for volunteers, and there were a number of people involved in the committee to make the decision, including people who I think would identify exactly the way that you identify, which is that they are transgender and feel very strongly about their chosen gender. And we decided as a group, after we talked, we went through it, we wrote down all of the values and the characteristics that we looked for in somebody receiving that award. And we decided as a barony that it was best for our populace to combine them into one award. Now, that might not be the case for your barony, and that's totally okay. And I think that that's the beauty of having smaller groups like that, where the people in your group choose the things that make the most sense to their population and what their population needs. So, you know, like if we have I can't say it much more than that, but that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Just it's very specific to your group. And I think that if it makes more sense for you to have 2 awards in your group and you feel very strongly about it, I would talk to your Baron and Baroness, talk to other members of the barony. If it's something that your barony has been talking about changing, volunteer to help organize a committee and, you know, to do that.
Sha'ya, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the one thing when this is becoming a conversation in, let's say, within the barony or even the kingdom, wherever this is kind of taking place, I think one of the things to really think about is what is it about the award that makes it gendered, right? So upon reading this question, I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain and find out, like, try and think in my mind why there would be an award that would only be appropriate for men, or why there would be an award that would only be appropriate for women. And so for me, I think that that's a conversation that needs to be. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm not saying that those aren't out there, But for me, I can't think of that. I can't think of one of those. I think absolutely healthy masculinity, healthy femininity is important. But is there a reason why a woman wouldn't be able, or someone who is non-binary or agender would not be, why they couldn't win an award that has to do with healthy displays of masculinity? I know that, you know, or why there is a reason that someone who is male or agender couldn't win an award that is about healthy displays of femininity. I think that that's kind of the question that I would bring up in those instances, because I think the idea here is that, you know, gender roles shouldn't necessarily be assigned across the board. I know in a lot of ways that there's things that, in the ways that I act, I absolutely identify as a woman, but I have masculine traits. I think some of my strengths are masculine traits, as well as some of my strengths are feminine traits. Is there a reason why I should only be able to be awarded for my feminine traits versus my masculine traits? And so I think that's a conversation. I think that's a deeper conversation that needs to be had when we're talking about gendered awards like that. And so that would be my recommendation, is not to just, you know, necessarily not dive down those rabbit holes. I think that those are important conversations to have. And so I think that you know, that's kind of what part of what we do, and part of what we should be encouraging others to do too.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think that there is something to be said for exploring what the award is actually for, beyond the idea that this is for men and this is for women, if that's what you have. And potentially, like Margavati mentioned, maybe it looks a little bit different. Maybe what it looks like is creating an additional thing that's the same type of award, but is gender neutral, and so provides that other path, because maybe that's what works for your particular set of people. There is no one right answer, because climate and culture is going to different. What people want is going to different. What it's going to take for them to feel seen and feel heard, that's all going to be different. But I do think that there are good questions to ask ourselves when we challenge these structures. Is there value in this? And for you, there is, absolutely. But looking at some of the other things that have been ingrained when we look at degendering or making things more inclusive, is there value, or is this rote pattern, right? Are we doing this because we've always done this? Or is there a reason that we're continuing to perpetuate these things? I think that's a big part of what the DEI office is encouraging people to do, take that perspective and see how we can eventually move towards more equity and inclusion for everyone. So on that note, that is all of our time. We're actually even a little over. We do have a few questions left. I'm so sorry we didn't get to them. Again, please email, reach out to your Kingdom folks. I am still happy to have a discussion around any of those, and I'm sure anyone else on the panel would absolutely do the same. I want to thank everyone for coming. We do this every week, same time, same night. So it's every Wednesday. It is 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central. So you can tune in here, and there will be a class or a panel or an interview or whatever I've cooked up for this particular week. And then you can also reach out to me. You can look on the SCA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion page and follow the main SCA page. And I will actually also get this up on the website. So there will be so many ways, so many ways. But thank you everyone for coming. Please do check out when the video is uploaded, there will be captions. Thank you to all of the panelists. Everyone's amazing. I'm thrilled to work with all of you. And I hope that we get a chance to have everyone meet all the folks in the DEI community. So thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you again.